Okay, good morning everyone. So welcome to Silver Sands webinar this morning. My name's Colin Gray and I'm joined this morning by James Mallalieu, who's one of our senior consultants, and he will take us through our session today on what's new in OneDrive and SharePoint. And this is basically following a lot of the many announcements that were made at Ignite last week. So as you can see, we're recording the session, so if there's anything we go over too quickly, you can go back and watch it at your leisure. Any questions as we go along, just type them into the chat and we will pick them up as we go along. And we've left a little bit of time at the end just to wrap up any outstanding things that you want to ask. So just before we start, I'm going to kick off with a very quick introduction to Silver Sands, and for any of you that haven't been with us before. So can you move the slide on? That's it, James. Yeah. So effectively, Silver Sands, we've been in business now for 35 years. We're a professional services organization. We specialize in Microsoft technologies, specifically around hybrid cloud IT. So on this slide on your screen, as you can see, there's three main areas we focus on. At the top in the large circle, we've got Microsoft 365, which contains a number of key components. First is Office 365, which is where your team, SharePoint, OneDrive, etc. reside, and that's our focus for today. In this area, consultants, they obviously work closely with clients to help them understand how best to deliver, manage, and make best use of the respective solutions, especially as Microsoft keep adding new updates and new functionality. So they help you keep up to speed with all that. Second component is Windows 10, and here we'll sort of encourage clients to take full advantage of all the latest enterprise desktop features, try and make the end user experience as good as possible, and enhance any remote access capabilities. Third area is enterprise mobility and security, and I think that's pretty much become an essential tool to control deployment, management, and any access levels for all your devices. And we use things like Microsoft Intune or Azure AD to help make sure all your devices, both laptops and phones, are secure and up to date here. Then moving down to large circle bottom left, we have Power Platform. We had our webinar on that on Tuesday. And this is solutions like Power Apps, Power Automate, Power BI. And I think that's an area where this solution set is really starting to transform how organizations enable digital services. Now that all of us are working at home quite a large proportion of the time, all of the time at the moment, and probably quite a proportion of the time going forward. Bottom right is Microsoft Azure, and here the consultants and the development teams will help migrate and integrate your on-prem systems with the Azure platform, and they'll also provide a lot of advice and guidance on how you can deliver an enhanced suite of business functions and reporting tools in Azure, if you've got a cloud-first application strategy. And that can be really useful in helping you drive the overall experience for your customers and help you with business growth and operational efficiency. Around the edges, you've got smaller circles around identity management, governance, security. Again, all crucial aspects of any delivery. And right in the center of the graphic is people and devices, which is the right place for the end users to be, because they really should be the focus for any change program that you're running in your organizations. Unfortunately, that's not always the case, as we've learned to find. So yeah, a lot of technical projects still focus on technical aspects of change rather than how best to support your end users and meet the strategic goals of the organization. So we have a large team of in-user adoption. I think we just got a new accreditation in that area very recently. So that helps your users accept the new ways of working around Office Microsoft 365, which is a useful addition to our offering as well. So that's Silver Sands on a slide. So thank you for being so patient, bearing with me, and I'll pass over to James now to start our session.
Great, thanks, Colin. Welcome everyone. So welcome to this session on what's new in OneDrive and SharePoint. And as Colin said, pretty much we're going to have a sprint around some of the key features that have either been rolled out or have been announced, some of which were only announced at Ignite 2021. I am more than happy for questions as I go through. So if you've got a question, please feel free to put it in the chat. And if you like, or even not like something that you see, chuck an emoji in there. It's useful to get people's feedback on this. And I'm going to crack on. I have left a bit of time at the end for questions. So if you want to wait at the end, feel free. But honestly, just post it in the chat and we'll go from there. So the first thing I'm going to talk about, the SharePoint App Bar. So this was announced quite a while ago, and I'm very excited that it is starting to roll out. In fact, I will show you a live demo of it. And it addresses a fundamental problem that's been in SharePoint pretty much for 20 years, since the year dot. And that is, how do we provide people with a consistent way of navigating our SharePoint environment from anywhere within the environment? Now, things like hub sites and the sort of Office 365 link that you see at the top, they're pretty good, but they typically don't solve the problem entirely. And what the SharePoint App Bar does is give us this little panel down the left-hand side of all modern SharePoint sites, consistently giving us the ability to navigate around the SharePoint environment. So let's have a quick look at it in action. So I am looking at a team site here, and you see on the left-hand side, I've got my little app bar. And my little app bar comprises of 4 key areas: global navigation, my sites, my news, my files. Now, if I switch over to a separate SharePoint site, this is a communication site, then I get the same app bar. So global navigation, my sites, my news, and my files. So an important thing to note, when this gets deployed into your environment, it will appear automatically. If you actually don't want it to appear, you have to take some action with PowerShell. So it will start appearing. Now, the sections in it by default, the global navigation link will link to the same place as the SharePoint link goes to. So it goes to what we call your SharePoint start page. The My Sites will display the list of sites you frequently visit and sites that you're following. Your news will surface recommended news for you, and your files will surface files that you've recently interacted with anywhere within your environment, be it OneDrive, be it Teams, be it SharePoint, etc. Now, if you want to customize the experience of the app bar, then you need to have a SharePoint home site, of which this is a SharePoint home site. And your SharePoint home site will give you the option to configure how the global navigation works. So if we go into here, so the first thing is to enable it or not. Now, that setting does not turn it on or off. What that setting does is say, instead of that link going to your SharePoint start page, I want the link to go to a set of customized navigation options that I put in here. A little logo, you can replace this home logo with your own organizational branded logo, and you decide where the navigation comes from. So simplistically, I can say, well, my home site already has the navigation that I want to make available to everyone in the organization. So I'm going to use my home site navigation. Okay, and if I selected that, these navigation options would then be present in the list there. If I select the second option, which is hub or global navigation, then if I'm using a hub site, it will use that. Or if I use the global navigation, I can actually edit my own navigation options. So I can put in completely separate set of options. Now, just a point about these options, they are hierarchical. So they work in the same way as normal SharePoint navigation. You've got up to 3 levels of navigation. And they can also be audience targeted. So if I wanted to create a navigation option for, say, sales, and I only wanted the sales team to be in that, then I can use a security group or Microsoft 365 group to target that link to only those people who exist within that group. Now, just a point, it's only popped up in my tenancy last night. It does take about 24 hours for these options to appear, which is why they're not currently appearing when I use that here. But so you can see what they look like. If we just go back here, they pretty much will appear like this. Now, these don't have to be links just to SharePoint content. They can be links to any web accessible content. So it could be within your environment. It could be on a public facing website. It could be an application that you, web-based application that you have in your environment. They can be any links. Okay, so let me just move on. Next thing I just want to cover is some changes to do with the branding that you can apply to sites. So Microsoft have been rolling out quite a lot of changes to web parts and to what you can do in terms of the design of the sites. And I just want to talk about two areas. So one is the design options, and this particularly relates to the header, and it's something that's I frequently need to make use of with client engagements. So I'm just going to go into an example of a site. And this site is called the Hybrid Work site. And this is a new template that Microsoft have provided as part of the SharePoint Lookbook. Now, if you're not familiar with the SharePoint Lookbook, I would definitely encourage you to go and have a look at the Lookbook. It is a fantastic resource. So in it, you have a whole load of designs of different types of SharePoint sites at organization level, department, team, and so forth. So if I go into solutions, the new one, workplace transformation site, tells you a little bit about the purpose of the site. It tells you technically how it's being put together, provides loads of example screenshots, which are great to understand how you can build different types of pages in SharePoint. And even better, you just click add to your tenant, and as long as you've got SharePoint admin rights, click provision and it will put it into your tenant for you. So definitely make use of that. Going back to my site though, so I want to talk about the header area here, and two new options have been added. So if I go into change the look and I go into header, the two new options are extended header and minimal header. They kind of do what they say on the tin. If I go to minimal, I get a very condensed header. So it utilizes the least amount of space on the screen. But sometimes we want to add a bit more pizzazz, a bit more impact. So I'm going to use the extended header. And this gives us the option to include an image. So I'm just going to change the image that we have in here. And let's select this one. And so I've now put an image. I can decide which area of the image I want to focus on. Obviously, there's a finite amount of space for the image, so it deals with resizing it. I can decide whether I want the site name to be there, because sometimes the image you use in the background or the logo, as in this case, has the site name. So I don't really want to say hybrid work twice. So I can take that off. And then I can also set the alignment. So I could put the, you won't see that there. Oops, I can put the logo left, center, or right. Just go down there. Let's do that again. Get rid of the slide. Set the logo to be the right. Click save. Okay. Now, one thing about the header, even though it seems quite big, all of SharePoint pages have this concept of what we call a shy header, which is when you scroll down the page, the header will automatically revert back to the minimal one, just to reduce the amount of screen real estate that people have. So that's some of the changes to the header. The next thing I want to talk about is something that I probably have a need for every other day. And this is the ability to take long SharePoint pages and use something called collapsible page sections. So essentially, if you have a very long page, so this is a good example, how to encourage team collaboration. And then we have a section on the page for 3, 4, 5 different ways that you can encourage team collaboration. But it actually makes the page quite long. So when you're reading the page, the person has to scroll down. What collapsible sections will allow you to do is take a selection, say that you want it to be collapsible, and decide whether you want an accordion or tabs. Now, effectively, tabs basically give you a tab for all of the sections included within that group. So these are the tabs here, and when I click on them, obviously, it would change to the content of that section. Or accordions work as expandable or collapsible sections, very useful for FAQs. So as an example, in my hybrid work site, if I go into Get Help, down here, there is an FAQ section. Now you can see already it's quite kind of long. And if you had 50 more FAQs, it would be even longer. So having that collapsible section for each of the FAQs would be really useful just to help people quickly find the FAQ that they're interested in. Okay, so a little bit about changes to file experiences within SharePoint. So the big one, no pun intended, is that you can store significantly larger files in SharePoint, so 250 gigabyte files, and that's being rolled out at the moment. Just a question on collapsible sections. April is the date it'll start to roll out. Doesn't mean you'll see it in April, but that's the date it'll start to roll out, so starting from April. So 250 gigabyte files. Now, typically your average Word document, Excel or PowerPoint potentially isn't going to be 250 gigabyte files. However, videos will be. And it's important to note that Microsoft are moving all video storage from Stream into SharePoint. Now, you may have seen that Teams meeting recordings are now going into your OneDrive or SharePoint sites. The same is true for all videos. I've put a link here if you're interested in Microsoft's roadmap for this, definitely take a look. But just to reiterate, all videos will be being stored and managed in SharePoint, not in Stream in the future. And this obviously helps with this 250 gigabyte file size. Now, obviously, if you're syncing a 250 gigabyte file and you're using OneDrive Sync, you might be concerned about that amount, that size of file. What it actually does in the background is breaks it into smaller chunks, and it deals with syncing what's called a differential sync, only those chunks that have changed in the overall file. So a 250 gigabyte file isn't going to have to sync 250 gigabytes every time something changes. One feature I'm going to briefly talk about here is
there's a question there, James, as well, just before you moved on.
Oh, live events. Pass. I'll come back to that. I don't know off the top of my head. It's a question about manually uploading the live event files to Stream. Okay. So one feature that's been available for a while, but I think a lot of people aren't aware of it. And honestly, it is my most used feature. I use this every day. So I just want to bring your attention to it. It's called Add to OneDrive. So let me show you a real life scenario. So let's say I'm working in this hybrid work SharePoint site. And let's say in this site, I have some documents that I am responsible for working on. So I go into the document library. Now, let's say I want these documents to be easily accessible to me. Okay, so I could use the sync option here, and the sync option will take this document library and it will sync it down to this device I'm currently working on. But that might not be that helpful to me because I might use multiple different devices. I might be using a mobile device at some point. So I really like the add shortcut to OneDrive, definitely over the sync option. So it does a couple of things that the sync option just doesn't do. But let me show you an example. So I can take a folder and I can add the shortcut to OneDrive, or I can take a whole library. In this case, I'm just going to add the folder. So I click Add Shortcut to OneDrive. Okay. Now, if I go across to my OneDrive, give it a quick refresh, you can see that that folder has been added into my OneDrive as a folder. Little icon there just shows it's a linked file. Now, you might think, well, what's the point? Here's the point. Anywhere where I access OneDrive, be it from a mobile device, from the OneDrive app, be it from my desktop, be it from a tablet, be it from the browser, will now include a link to that file, to that folder, and therefore a link to the files within it. Secondly, any device that supports the ability to sync from OneDrive, that file or folder will automatically be synced into my OneDrive files and folders on my device. So unlike the sync option, which only does it for the device I'm using, this now means that content is treated as if it is in my OneDrive. Just want to add, it isn't in my OneDrive, it's a link, okay? So it doesn't move the content. It just means that that content now is treated as if it's in my OneDrive. So it gets synced and it's accessible from any device. So I just wanted to point that out, super useful feature. Okay. So a few things happening with lists in SharePoint. As I'm sure some of you know, last year Microsoft rolled out Microsoft Lists. And Microsoft Lists was a dedicated app to allow people to use the list capability to manage data. Now, behind the scenes, it's using SharePoint to manage these lists, but the Microsoft Lists app gives users access to that capability without kind of going through SharePoint. And there's quite a few things that are coming along the road for lists. One of them is offline support, and this will be delivered through the iOS mobile app. So if you have the iOS mobile app for Microsoft Lists, it will soon support the ability to have access to those lists, both in view and edit mode, without having an internet connection. So that will be useful in scenarios where people have to go out, collect information or access information where they have limited access to the internet. A few of the other options I'm just going to briefly run through. So I've got a list within this hybrid site, the hybrid work checklist. I'll just open it full screen. And a few sort of things we can do. Some of these you might be aware of if you've used lists because they've been around for a while. So I can format this column. So for instance, I can say for yes or no, I want an thumbs up for yes, and actually for no, just change styles, I'm going to put a thumbs down. Okay. Then I can decide where I want it to be to make it consistent, and I can do a couple of other things. So that's formatting individual columns. I can also take the entire list and I can format that. So for instance, format current view, take the list, and I can turn it into what we call a gallery view. And so the gallery view gives you this tiled type interface. So instead of a row interface, we get this tiled interface, and then I can decide what columns to display, whether to display the titles or not. If you've got images, images will display in this. So some pretty good features for providing a different view. If the list had in it a calendar dates, then one of the options I'd have here is to display it as a calendar. This list doesn't have any dates in it, so I can't do that. Now, in terms of editing the list, the edit grid view has had a lot of updates. So if you're not familiar with this, this is a fantastic way of quickly editing a lot of content in a list. So you can do things like, I can drag columns, but one of the things people sometimes aren't aware is I can actually copy, go down to new item, sorry, I was in the wrong place, and then paste the content in, content gets placed in. And I can copy and paste content from Excel, from a few different places, and it'll paste that content in.
James, now, Josephine just asked, does it have a Gantt chart view?
It doesn't, but if you, I can send you a link. These views where you go format current view, if it doesn't support what you want, there is a dangerous button here called advanced mode. And whilst you don't have to write the JSON to do it, there is loads of examples on the internet and in GitHub that give you hundreds of different options. So worth having a look there if there's a Gantt view to do what you want it to do. So sometimes you want to not use the edit grid view. You want a bit more control over how people add list items. And historically, you've had to do this by taking your list and converting it to Power Apps. Now, Microsoft have given you kind of an intermediary step here. So I can say, okay, I'm going to decide what columns to display, and I'm going to decide the order of the columns. So I can do things like decide which columns to display, and I can say, Well, I'm not going to display the assigned to unless another column has a certain value. So you can put conditional logic in here. So a common requirement for this would be if I set column A to be yes, like mandatory to be yes, then the user needs to fill in column B, that type of thing. So you can do that, so conditional logic. And the other thing that we can do is you'll notice that I've added a header onto here and I've added some sections. So again, you can put some layout and some control into your page to basically provide the user some help in filling in forms. So I'm not going to go into this because it does require a bit of coding to do it, but essentially you can configure the body, the header, and the footer. So some good options there if you don't want to go all the way into turning it into a Power App. And the other thing that you can do now with lists is make simple rules. So we all know that you can use Power Automate, but for many people, just going into Power Automate is a bit of a tall order. So essentially what rules allow us to do is say, okay, when something happens in this list, I want to do something. So let's say when a new item is created, send an email to this person. So I could say, we'll send the email to the assigned to person, or send the email to me. So I'll just say, send an email to that person, click create, and it's done. Okay, so you might think, well, that doesn't give a lot of flexibility, but what you lose in flexibility, you gain in ease of use. Very simple to create these notification rules without going into Power Automate. Okay. So switching gears slightly, security and compliance, a big area for many organizations, increasingly with the threat from both external and also internal risks. One of the things that we're really seeing people starting to take more seriously and moving forward with is the ability to apply a sensitivity label to a SharePoint site. And the reason why you'd want to do this is because you want to apply some policies to the site that dictate what people can and can't do within that site. And you want that policy to be clear to the people using the site and clear to your administrators that that policy is being applied. So let me show you a simple example. If I go back to my hybrid work site, and I just go and share it. So I'm going to share the site. So I'm going to go into site permissions and I'm going to click share site and I'm going to share it with this person who's not part of the organization. Tells me it's outside the organization. Okay, I'm not going to share it, but I could share it. Likewise, if I go into my document library and I take this file here and I click share this file, and I'll say with specific people, and I'll share it with this person. Okay, and it will just say outside your organization. I can share it. Nice little thing here. They've just moved that option there. So if you want to restrict whether they can view or edit, that icon's now there. But what happens if this hybrid work is only for internal employees? I don't really want anyone in the site to be able to share content with someone outside the organization. So what I can do is I can apply a sensitivity label. So you see down here in the site information, I have a sensitivity label, and I'm going to apply one that says internal use only. Click save. And now what should happen is when I go to share the site, let's give it a second. It says, no, you can't do that at the site level. The organization's policies don't allow it. If I go into the library and do the same thing, so share a document, same thing, organizations' policies don't allow it. So that information, sorry, that sensitivity label I applied to the site applied a policy that restricts sharing. And it's really as simple as that. In the background, if I go into my 365 Compliance Center, in information protection, I have a series of sensitivity labels. And here is the label that I was using. And if we just edit the label, these have been around for a while, but it's in this section, groups and sites, where Microsoft have added some additional options. So I'm just going to skip through. Yes, I've ticked this label is going to be used for groups and sites. Click next, next. Yes, I want to apply external sharing and potentially conditional access policies. So let's click next. So this is what's being applied. It's saying that when this label is applied to a SharePoint site, set the sharing policy to only people in your organization. And one of the things that's being added is the ability to apply additional conditional access policy. So you could say, well, a user can only access this site if they access it via multi-factor authentication, or they can only access this site from a particular geographic location or particular network. So that's coming in the roadmap. So that's essentially what this setting does. If I go back to my site and just take the setting away, and then go and share the site, it will allow me to share it again. Okay.
James, there's a question there on the license requirements around sensitivity labels. What of those features do you get within your E3? It could be a bigger question than.
So that's covered in E3. I'm pretty sure just what I've shown you there is E3.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm just going to mention a couple of things that are changing in the admin experience. So firstly, you're going to get a whole new set of little tiles. So when you go into the admin center for SharePoint, you get some tiles that will give you an at-a-glance view of what's happening in the environment. One that I particularly like is site search, because often I'm going to the admin center because I'm looking to change something to do with the site. So this little site search box will really help with that. The second thing is the OneDrive and SharePoint admin centers are going to be combined. So again, if you kind of have experience of this, you'll know that they're two different admin centers and they duplicate some of the settings, which can be very confusing. There is a new governance dashboard being rolled out, and this really ties into what I've just talked about with sensitivity labels. Sorry, this is a bit small down here, but it allows you to, again, at a glance, have a look at a report that says, show me the sharing activity for all sites with either specific sensitivity labels applied or a certain sensitivity label applied. And so in the example they're showing here, it's saying, if we have SharePoint sites that allow people to share with anyone, what we call anyone links, how many times are these being shared? And you can see the one at the top, Contoso HR allows anyone links. Its sensitivity is confidential, but it's got a lot of sharing activity. Something would tell me there that that's not right. If that's a HR site, lots of content being shared with anyone probably, and it's confidential, isn't right. So that's a new report that's coming. And another one that's really important is, with more and more people making use of OneDrive Sync, is having the ability to centrally view what is happening with the health of OneDrive Sync, not only across the organization, which is what these reports here are doing, but also drill down into individual users. So when an individual user is having a problem with their OneDrive Sync, that will be reported to you. It will notify you of when files aren't syncing, when things are being blocked, when they've got the wrong version of the sync app, and so forth. So really important, because sync does usually create quite a lot of support type of issues. Okay, so for the rest of the session, I want to talk a bit about Viva. I want to talk a bit about it from a context of SharePoint. So as this session's about SharePoint, I'm going to talk about what it means to SharePoint and what it might mean to your SharePoint investment. So essentially, Microsoft announced Viva last month, and they announced it as a employee experience platform, an EXP. And essentially, they've defined that as a system of experiences that helps you engage employees and inspire leaders. Okay, but let's kind of strip away some of the marketing stuff that goes along with it. Essentially, it comprises of 4 modules, and these 4 modules are there to address, I think, issues that a lot of organizations are facing at the moment with how we deal with our employees, engaging our employees, inspiring our employees, keeping them motivated, and so forth. And so these 4 modules are connections, which is all around how we communicate and engage with our employees. Insights, which is about looking at productivity and the well-being of our employees. Learning, which is all about allowing our employees to learn and grow in their roles. And topics is all about how do we connect people, knowledge, and experts together. Now, the key thing about Viva is it's not a new product. It's not like an app, like another Teams or another SharePoint. It's important to think of it as making use of the apps and the services within 365 that you already use. The thing that is consistent, though, and you'll see this in a lot of the Microsoft demos and a lot of the messaging, is it's being experienced through Microsoft Teams. Now, we're seeing a big shift in organizations starting to think about Microsoft Teams being the digital workspace for their employees, the kind of focal point, what we'd call a team-centric experience. And this is because through the pandemic, most of us are using Teams every day to support chat, collaboration, meetings. And therefore, as we're in Teams, it makes sense to start bringing other content, other experiences, other processes, other applications into that Teams experience. So from an end user point of view, instead of thinking, oh, I've got to go into Stream, oh, I've got to go into SharePoint, oh, I've got to go into OneDrive, they just see it all as Teams, and everything gets brought to them within that Teams experience. So something that we're seeing a lot, and we're talking a lot to clients about, this kind of team-centric experience, and you're seeing this a lot with Viva. So I'm just going to dive in, and I'm going to talk about 2 of the modules today, and that's because these 2 modules are directly relevant to SharePoint. I'm doing a Teams session same time next week, and I will cover the other 2 modules in that session because they're more directly relevant to Teams. So the first module I'm going to talk about is Viva Connections. And let's get the important bit out of the way. This is free, right? So this is, you're going to get this if you are already licensed for SharePoint, Microsoft 365, Office 365. So give or take, if you're using Microsoft 365, you will be licensed for Viva. And the purpose of Viva is to provide a company branded place that brings together news, resources, conversations to your employees. Now, you'd be forgiven for thinking, surely that's what SharePoint does, or surely that's what our intranet does. And if you're thinking that, you're absolutely right. And essentially, Viva is building upon SharePoint. It's building upon the concept of the SharePoint home site to use SharePoint to bring together this content. But you'll notice in all the screenshots, it's being presented through Teams. So you probably can't see this, but this is actually a Teams interface. Now, obviously, we've been able to take a SharePoint site such as this and present it in Teams for quite some time now. We can build a little app and we can surface our SharePoint site. However, there are some differences that at the moment, the experience within this SharePoint app within Teams can be quite limited. Okay, so the navigation disappears, you can't edit pages and so forth. All of those will go away. And the second thing is this little app here will also include the SharePoint App Bar that we talked about earlier on. So it will kind of bring together what I talked about with SharePoint, what the home site and the Teams experience to actually provide a much fuller, richer experience within the Teams interface. Now, in case you're wondering, no, you don't have to exclusively access it through the Teams interface. So if we just drill into it in a bit more detail, there are some new features that are being added, some new capabilities. And these are broadly described as the dashboard, the feed, and the resources. So the dashboard allows the organization to curate a set of tiles. And these tiles allow employees to take actions, to fulfill tasks, or maybe just access to a tool, and they can be personalized based on role. So if you think about it, in this screenshot, this dashboard tab that I've got here is a list of tiles that are specifically targeted at me based on my role. Now it's being shown in the mobile device interface here, but if you skip back, you probably can't see that. It would display in the SharePoint interface like any other kind of web part that you'd have. The feed extends what we briefly talked about before with the SharePoint newsfeed. So instead of it just bringing together SharePoint newsfeed content, it's also going to surface in Teams content and Yammer content. So bringing together feeds from SharePoint in terms of news, Teams in terms of conversations, and Yammer content in terms of posts into a single feed. And then finally, the resources option is similar to the SharePoint App Bar. It brings together links to resources. So there could be links to content that exists in your 365 environment, or it could be content that exists outside of it. And also bringing together communities. So if you're using Yammer. So again, you can see in this screenshot, this user's pinned this, which is a Yammer conversation, into their resources. It's got a list of recently opened things. Just at the bottom here, you can just sneak a peek at, that's the SharePoint kind of global navigation. Now, so you're aware of when all this is happening, they talk about the desktop experience. So they use the word desktop. That means the Teams desktop app or the Teams on the web. That is rolling out as we speak. So the app that will allow you to surface your SharePoint home site into the Teams experience is being rolled out at the moment. And throughout March, that'll be rolled out. And then in the summer, the Teams mobile app will be updated to include more of what you're seeing in this interface. And also there will be some more, the dashboard functionality, from what I understand, won't be coming until the summer. So there's some things that are going to be rolled out, primarily how you put your home site into Teams. And then secondly, you'll see some more functionality rolling out as we move through the year. At the end of this deck, by the way, I have put some roadmap slides that will show you what Microsoft have announced in terms of when it's coming. So the next thing I want to talk about is Viva Topics. So this is around how do we bring together knowledge and expertise and make it available to our people within our organization. And I actually really like this definition from Microsoft, Wikipedia with AI superpowers for your organization, which is a pretty good analogy. But essentially what Viva Topics does is allows you to organize the content that you have in your organization around topics. Now that content could exist in lots of different places, and those topics could be talked about in lots of different places. So it's organizing that content into topics and allowing people in the organization to find that information and find the people who are experts around that given topic. Now, this is utilizing SharePoint, but again, you'll see from the user interface, it's being accessed through Teams, again, to reinforce the team-centric approach. You can also access it through Outlook, and I'll show an example of that in a moment. This one is not free. So this one, I'm going to say it doesn't matter what Microsoft licensing you've got. If you want it, in the UK, it's £3.80 per user per month for users who want access to Viva Topics. There is a free trial available. So if you're interested, you can activate a free trial. I think it's 25 days trial, but you will definitely have to pay for Viva Topics. Now, in terms of a bit of a drill down into what it does, there's three kind of stages. There's the identification, and this is really using AI to look through your content and identify processes, projects, products, things that it can organize into topics. So it will find and it will present to you a list of what it thinks are topics from your organization. Now, obviously, what the AI finds might not be entirely accurate. There might be topics in there you don't want to make available as topics. There might be topics that are inappropriate. So there is obviously a human aspect to this, where there's a curation process where you help it, you remove topics, you manually add topics, you connect people to the topics. And once you've done that, end users then can experience those topics through the applications that they're using. Now, it's probably easier just to show you a quick demo of this. So in this scenario, I'm in Microsoft Teams and I am logged in as Nesta, and I'm in a channel, and my colleague Patty has sent me a post where there's a reference to a recent partner survey for the on-time delivery project. Now, I might now have no idea what the on-time delivery project is. So you notice it's got an underline, and the underline indicates to me that it is a Viva topic. So I can then click on it and it brings up what is called a topic card. And this topic card gives me a bit of information about that topic. So for instance, it's given me the name of the topic, it's given me an acronym, it's given me a description, it's given me people who are experts in that topic, and also a list of links to resources relating to that topic. So just that alone, you can think how useful it is if when your colleagues sent you a Teams message or an email message and they use an acronym or they talk about a project and you think, I have no idea what they're talking about, just to be able to hover over it and get a little bit of context. But I can take that a bit further. So I can essentially drill into it, and then I go to the topic page. And the topic page, which as you can see here is presented in SharePoint, is a page dedicated to this particular topic, which is the on-time delivery topic. Now, the topic page has some alternate names, and AI will provide these, and it will also have a description about the topic that AI has also provided. However, as you see here, the administrator has also updated the name of this. We have a list of people who are experts in this topic, and I'll show you an example of where a user opts in or opts out, whether they want to be an expert in this topic. And then if we scroll down, we have pinned files and pages. So these are pages and files that have been curated. So a human has said, no, this is definitely related to this topic. And then under that, we have topics that have been suggested. So this is AI basically suggesting that these files are relevant to this topic. Now, just a point here, you will never see a file that you do not have access to. So there's nothing going on that would give you access to something that you wouldn't in the background have access to. So you can see these, if you look very closely, sorry, it's a bit small, where these have come from. If I didn't have access to that project management folder, I wouldn't see that file. But if I had access to the partnership program folder, I would see this file. If I click on a file, then obviously no surprise, it takes me into the file. And then I can access it. Again, as I said, provided I have read access. If I scroll down, I can pin related sites. So this is where you want to curate actually official sources for information about this given topic. Could be a SharePoint site, could be a Yammer community, so forth. And then down at the bottom, we have this fascinating little thing. So this is showing me how topics are connected together in the organization. AI will drive this, but also these can be manually done. Now, what's interesting is if we have a look, it's connected this project together with this organization, and that's because GDI is a pilot partner for the on-time delivery project. So that organization has appeared as a topic because it's something that Contoso works with, and it showed the connection between the project and that organization. Now, obviously, if I were to click on that organization as a topic, I would then see what other topics that organization is connected to.
James, quick question on that area. with topics, is it for the people that curate the content or the people that consume the content?
Both. Both. So if someone wants to use, there's no difference in licensing between a topic administrator and a topic consumer. So if I just go back to the top of the page here, this is a SharePoint page. So no surprise, I can edit it. So these are just web parts on the page. So I can add an alternate name for a topic. I can pin a file, so I would in this case, as a topic, and I can go down, and if I wanted to, I can add a new relationship to the graph. So I could add in another organization who's associated with that on-time delivery project. Okay. Now, if I skip across and click this link to the related SharePoint site, this is a page within operations that talks about this on-time delivery initiative. And what this is showing is that even in SharePoint, the content on SharePoint pages is aware of topics. And so like we saw in Teams, the same thing here, it recognizes that this is a topic and therefore I get the topic card. And the same thing will be true in Outlook. So getting an email, and the same thing will be true in Word, Excel and PowerPoint further down the road. So yeah. Now, obviously, one of the things that you might want to do is yourself decide whether you want to be listed against a topic. So the AI might think, well, you are working on this topic and you're on the product team. Therefore, can we suggest you as a resource for the Mark 8 project? So this is showing to Nesta the topics that he can be listed, and he can decide to be removed or taken away from that. Now, Nesta also has some administrative rights here. So he can go into manage topics, and you can see what's happening here. Suggested topics, that's coming from AI. Confirmed is where I've obviously taken the topic and said, yes, I can confirm this, we want to use it. And then published is when it's made available to the wider organization. It's worth saying here, you can just manually add topics as well. So you don't have to rely on the AI to find all your topics. Now, obviously, over time, topics change. So the AI part is quite important unless you're going to put someone on this quite a lot. So you do want it to find new topics that are arising within your organization that you want to publish. But just important to say, AI might suggest it, but there is an air gap between it suggesting it and it becoming published. So you don't have to worry about it just churning out loads of topics for things that you haven't curated. And a final thing is from search. Makes sense that if I do a search and I do a search for Mark 8, makes sense that a new topic card is displayed within the search results, because the topic card is a piece of content and you get a nice summary of the topic here, the same acronyms, description, suggested people, suggested resources. And also what it's saying here is you can give feedback. It's saying, should that person be connected to the topic? And I shouldn't have skipped over the last one, but that was just to say that the topic cards will be coming to SharePoint, will be coming to Office, will be coming to Outlook, will be coming to Yammer. These will be integrated into the entire environment. So those are two of the Viva modules, and I know it's a very quick kind of whirlwind tour, but my key takeaway for you on them is that each of them has slightly different licensing. They are not separate products, though. They are all utilizing the Teams, the SharePoint, the Yammer, the apps that you already have. But Microsoft is talking about making them primarily accessible via the Teams user interface. And as I said before, you'll see that in lots of the examples. I've got a topics app here within Teams, which does the same as the SharePoint site, shows my topics, gives you the management. In fact, it is actually just the SharePoint site, but being displayed within Teams. So I'm conscious I've rambled on for quite some time and we're nearly out of the allotted time. So just a couple of things before I hand over to questions. If you want to ask me anything outside the session, please feel free to either email me, Twitter or LinkedIn. Everything I've talked about is in the Microsoft roadmap. Have a look there. Most things, when they're going to launch into your tenancy, will go into your message center in your 365 environment, and there's tons of resources on the tech community. Just highlighting a couple of additional webinars that we're running over the next few weeks. My colleague Steve's doing a session on what's new in Azure, so similar format as this, but on Azure. I'm doing a session next week on what's new in Teams, again, similar format as this, but with Teams. And Mark, my colleague's doing a session on what's new in desktop and device management, excuse me, at the beginning of April. A couple of things that we provide a number of sort of what we call accelerators. So if you're looking at SharePoint, we have a number of primers, so things that are around helping you understand the capabilities, or accelerators, really get you kick-started on projects, or reviews if you kind of want us to have a look at something you've got in place, like security and compliance. With that, does anyone have a question? And I apologize, you won't be able to unmute your mic because I set them all to be muted.
I've got a couple that have been asked, James. So Lorna was asking, when you were talking about list experiences, is it possible to move a list and create it in the app to a team at a later stage? Or team site, rather?
Yeah, you can move. It's actually very easy to move the list structure. The data is slightly more challenging because when you create a new list in a SharePoint site, it will say, do you want to copy an existing list that you already have? And if you say yes, it will give you access to all the lists that you currently have access to, and you can copy it, and that will copy across the list structure, the views, and any other configurations. But unfortunately, it doesn't copy across the data. There's a few ways to do it. It depends how, I'm going to say, technically savvy. You can do it via PowerShell. You can do it through quite a few third-party tools, give a list copy function. Probably a bit too detailed for this level of conversation. But yeah, the data is more of a problem. The list structure is not a problem. Okay.
And Delia was asking a general question. First of all, when will recordings move to OneDrive? There's a little bit of confusion about that. Is it already there, or is it sort of happening over the next few?
So there was an opt-in that was available that allows you to start moving them now. If you haven't opted in, Microsoft have some dates when they're going to move you, whether you like it or not. Just a point, there's a differentiation between academic education tenancies versus standard commercial tenancies. I will try and dig out the list of the Microsoft have updated a document which says the dates they are doing things. And that's got the information in it, so I'll try and post that into the chat. But you can opt in as of today and get the move done, as opposed to wait to Microsoft do it, and perhaps you not be prepared to do it. So I would proactively do it, but do be aware you do need to issue some comms to your people about how it impacts meeting recordings.
Yeah, Delia thought it was the 7th of July, but she's just wondering if she's got to test it internally.
Yeah, there is a page on, you can Google it. If you Google Microsoft Teams meetings in SharePoint, there's a Microsoft page and it'll have the dates in there. Apologies, they do change the dates in there quite often, and I haven't looked at it the last few days, so I don't want to give you the wrong steer there.
That's fine. I think Lorna thought 7th of July was for educational customers. And one last general question for anybody who's still on the call. Delia was wondering, out of all the people listening, how many people think they would be prepared within their organizations to pay for something like Viva Topics? If you just raise your hand if you think that's something that would be of interest to you, assuming you could get budgets, or is it sort of something for a future review? If anyone just raise their hands if they think it's a must-have for now. Not sure I see how many hands we've got raised. There's a few hands raised there.
So one of the things, if you put it into commercial sense, the Microsoft stance on this is quite interesting, that the amount of time people are spending looking for content that already exists is increasing exponentially. And they've come up with some simple algorithms that justify the cost in license. Of course they have, but they've come up with some algorithms that allow you to see the actual cost benefit of making it easier for people to find both experts, find knowledge and find content, and reduce the amount of time it takes to search for things. So I think I wouldn't just take a technology view on it. I would look at, if you're an organization where people are spending a significant amount of time searching for and potentially not finding content, there may be a justification to look at the costing model of Viva and understand its benefit.
Excellent. Okay, so I think we'll call it a halt there because we're just going over time a little bit. Any other questions? Feel free to just email James or I separately. I'm just going to repost into the chat well, you've already got the feedback survey in there, but if you could please take some time just to complete that before you leave the call, that would be very much appreciated. And otherwise, we look forward to meeting you at one of our future events. And thank you for attending.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.